Welcome back to Washington Unplugged. I'm now joined by CBS News White House correspondent Peter Maer and Politico.com's editor David Mark. Peter, I can hear the birds in the background there as the president gets ready to take off for Europe. Tell me about the trip and what they're thinking over there about it.
Well, of course, the president's going to be the rookie summiteer, but first among equals at two summits. The first one, the G20 meeting, that'll center on the economy in London early next week. And then later in the week, he's going to go on to Germany and France for the big NATO meeting. Through the years, these summits have often evolved into gabfests and empty agendas, but I can't recall a pair of summits that have been so important in a very long time, perhaps going back to the Soviet era and all of the arms control summits. At that G20 meeting in London, the economy, of course, is going to be front and center. The president under a lot of pressure from the European partners to come up with some firm regulations. He'll be asking them for more economic stimulus, and the markets will be watching it all, and the long-term and short-term investors will be watching it all, and it could really shake the markets depending on whether they have lip service at that session or they come up with something solid.
And then also, well, there's an interesting thing. In Europe, he's quite popular. He's gotten personally popular. He's gotten some pushback on his policies. There's the stimulus, of course, and then there's his announcement today on Afghanistan. How do you think that'll play?
Well, that's going to be interesting. You know, he enjoys very high ratings. In fact, his ratings, his public approval ratings in places like England and France and Germany and other places on the itinerary are actually stronger than they are here, higher than they are here, up in the high 70s and low 80s in some of those places. But there will be some pushback in terms of more troops from those countries to go to Afghanistan. The U.S. increasingly in a go-it-alone position on that. And by the end of the year, there'll be over 60,000 U.S. troops there. And I don't think we're going to see the Europeans commit to additional troops, although England is hinting at it now that they may send a couple thousand more, but the others, not likely.
David, there's a lot going on domestically as well. It's sort of funny to have international affairs intrude here. The president had a press conference this week, wasn't really asked any questions about it. Domestically, he started the week trying to pivot from the mess he inherited to the budget he's trying to sell. How do you do this week?
Well, it's a work in progress. Probably the biggest obstacle, the biggest challenge the president faces now is from Democrats on Capitol Hill as much as Republicans. We saw the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, Kent Conrad, essentially carve up his budget and say, you're not getting all the tax cuts you wanted, the ones you had proposed. We're going to change a bunch of other things. So he's got to deal with his own team as much as the opposition.
That's right. So he got a little pushback from his own team. Then enter the Republicans. In the House, they put forward a budget, and the White House had quite a fun time pointing out that, as Robert Gibbs put it, there were more pictures of windmills in this budget than there were charts of numbers. There was only one picture of a windmill. Tell me the story about that Republican budget.
Well, of course, this is all a bit of a straw man because in our system of government, it's not the opposition's responsibility to come up with a budget, but you would never know that listening to the White House. It's very politically savvy on that. Having said that, the Republicans kind of bought into this idea of having to put forward an alternative budget. There were some real rifts and splits developing here between House Minority Leader John Boehner, who was kind of fuzzy on the specifics, and some of the other House leaders who had very hard numbers they wanted to put forward. And we saw some internal dissension that was very fascinating to watch.
Peter, what do you think in terms of the president being overseas for this long period, the mix in terms of foreign policy versus domestic policy? Is he now off the stage domestically? Do Republicans have a little room to run here? How are they going to balance that at the White House?
Well, especially at that G20 meeting in London, John, it's going to be a real mix. I mean, these things are all intertwined. The U.S. economy very much on the line in every facet of that meeting. When you talk about more regulation, when you talk about this call for more stimulus, and there could be some surprises too. The president will be meeting on the sidelines with the leaders of Russia and China and India and South Korea. A lot of trade issues that affect so many parts of the country, the farm belt and any of the industrial sectors. So there's no escaping the challenges, and I'm sure the domestic challenges, and I'm sure he's going to also stay very closely attuned to the evolving budget fight that you guys are talking about.
In this budget fight, David, the president is trying a mix of different ways to talk to the American people. This week he held an online town hall, the first time ever for a president. A little bit of a gimmick, but also it was sort of successful. What's your sense of how successful he's been, both going over the filter, the news filter, and also using that filter to sell his policies?
Well, there's been some concern about overexposure, putting the president out there too much, whether it's online, television, whatever form it might be. The White House doesn't seem overly concerned about that. They seem to feel that their best asset is the president himself. The more he can sell the American people on his proposals, whether it's the budget or revising the banking system, whatever else it might be, that's their best way to go.
He's the salesman. Okay.
That's
Thank
right.
you, David. Peter, thanks very much.
Sure.
You're watching Washington Unplugged on CBSNews.com.